The most satisfying moment of my life wasn't our wedding day, wasn't the birth of our daughter, wasn't even the morning I finally left. It was a Tuesday in October, standing in the parking garage of the Meridian Hotel, listening to my husband's voice crack through the phone as he said the words, "My card isn't working." None of them. I said, that's strange, and I hung up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Not with the betrayal, because honestly the betrayal had been going on long enough that I'd stopped recognizing it as one. I'm talking about the moment I woke up. And I mean really woke up. It was a Wednesday morning in February, and I was sitting at our kitchen table in Naperville, Illinois, going through receipts the way I did every month, organizing them for our accountant, tracking expenses for the small interior design business I'd been running out of our home for 11 years. My husband, who I'll call my husband because that's all he deserves to be called at this point, had left early for the office. He did that early mornings, late evenings. I'd long since stopped asking why. I was going through his business card statement. I had access because I managed the household finances, always had. It was the one domain where he'd shrugged and said, "You're better at this than I am." And I found a charge I didn't recognize. Dinner for two at Spiaggia. $412. Now, I'd been to Spiaggia once for our 10th anniversary. My husband knew it was my favorite restaurant in the city. He'd never taken me back. I sat very still for a moment. Then I kept scrolling. There were more. Not dramatic amounts, he was too careful for that. 100 here, a gift card purchase there. Flowers twice from a florist in River North we'd never used. Hotel parking, another dinner. Tickets to a show at the Lyric Opera. We hadn't been to the opera since before our daughter started high school. I didn't cry. That surprised me, honestly. I thought I would. But what I felt instead was something quieter and colder, like a door closing inside me. Like some part of me had already known, had been preparing, and was only now receiving confirmation of what it had suspected for a long time. I put the statement back where I found it, made myself a second cup of coffee, and started thinking. Let me tell you a little about who I was before I tell you what I did. I married my husband 22 years ago when I was 26. He was in commercial real estate, ambitious and charming, the kind of man who made you feel, when he focused on you, like you were the only person in the room. I had a degree in fine arts and a genuine talent for space and color that I hadn't yet figured out how to monetize. He saw potential in me, or so he said. Looking back, I think he saw utility. I'm not saying it was all calculated from the beginning, I don't think it was. But over 2 decades, a pattern emerged. When he got his first big commercial listing, I was the one who styled the model units. When his firm started pitching high-end residential clients, my portfolio became part of the pitch. My aesthetic, my eye, my relationships with contractors and furniture reps. When clients became friends and friends became dinner guests, I cooked, I decorated, I remembered birthdays and allergies and the names of people's dogs. And I built my own business at the same time. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't much at first, a few residential projects, word of mouth, a modest income. But by the time I'm talking about, I had a real client base. My own invoices, my own bank account at a different institution from our joint accounts. A habit I'd started years ago, almost accidentally, because it was easier to track my business income separately. I never thought it would matter the way it eventually did. Here's what else I had: records. 11 years of organized financial records, because that's who I am. Every receipt, every statement, every tax return. I knew our finances the way some people know their neighborhood. Every street, every shortcut, every place something had gone wrong in the past. I spent the next 2 weeks being very, very quiet and very, very thorough. My husband was preparing for what he called the deal of his career, a commercial development partnership with a group of investors, the kind of thing he'd been angling toward for years. The signing was scheduled for mid-October at the Meridian Hotel downtown. He'd been talking about it for months. Client dinners, golf outings, the works. He was buying a new suit. He had his assistant send flowers to the lead investor's wife. I knew all of this because I still managed the household expenses, still opened the mail, still had access to the accounts he'd stopped paying close attention to because he trusted me to handle them. Or rather, because he'd forgotten I existed as a thinking, observant person and had started seeing me as furniture. That was his mistake. About 10 days after I found the Spiaggia charge, I came home early from a client site visit to find my husband on the back porch, talking on his phone in a low voice. He didn't hear me come in. I stood just inside the kitchen door and listened to him say, "She's not going to be an issue." She never is. He was talking about me. I went upstairs, changed my shoes, and left again through the front door. I sat in my car in the driveway for a while, then I called my sister. My sister is 4 years older than me, a family law attorney in Evanston, and one of approximately 3 people on earth I trust completely. I told her what I'd found. I told her what I'd heard. She was quiet for a moment and then she said very calmly, "Don't touch anything yet. Come see me this weekend. Bring everything." I brought everything. What she helped me understand over that weekend changed the way I saw my own situation. Not just emotionally, practically. I had more protection than I realized, partly because I'd been meticulous, and partly because of decisions I'd made years ago without knowing they'd matter. My business accounts were clean and separate. Several pieces of furniture and art I'd purchased for our home were documented as business assets. I had records showing my direct contribution to multiple properties my husband had sold over the years. Staging, design consulting, client entertainment I'd hosted. "You've been building a case without knowing it," my sister told me. "Now let's be intentional." She referred me to a colleague, a divorce attorney named, well, let's just call her my attorney because she deserves her privacy given how brilliantly she handled everything. We met 3 times in March. By April, I had a plan. And then my husband's girlfriend decided to accelerate the timeline. Her name doesn't matter. What matters is that she was 31, worked in leasing at my husband's firm, and had apparently decided after 2 years of being a secret that she was tired of waiting. I know this because in the first week of April, while my husband was in Dallas for a conference, she called our home number. We still had a landline. My mother-in-law called it, God rest her soul, so I'd kept it. I answered. There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, I thought I'd get voicemail." I said, "He's traveling. Can I take a message?" Another pause. And then, I don't know what possessed her. Confidence, impatience, a desire to force his hand. She said, "You should ask him why he's been in Chicago every Thursday for the past year. And you should ask him what he's planning to do with the money in the Henderson account." The Henderson account. I didn't know what that was. I wrote it down on the notepad I kept by the phone. "Thank you," I said. "I'll let him know you called. Don't you want to know who I am?" "I already know what you are," I said, and I hung up. I sat down at the kitchen table and I stayed there for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just thinking. The Henderson account. I called my attorney that afternoon. Turns out the Henderson account was a business account my husband had opened in the name of a shell LLC he'd set up 2 years prior. Around the same time, I would later realize that he'd started seeing this woman. It had been receiving transfers from a client trust account that he co-managed with a partner at his firm. It wasn't a lot, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. The kind of thing that, if left to grow, becomes very significant. The kind of thing that his investment partners signing that October deal would have needed to know about before putting their names on anything. My attorney contacted a forensic accountant. The forensic accountant started pulling threads. Meanwhile, I went on with my life. I made dinner. I attended my daughter's spring orchestra concert. She's a junior in college now, but she was home that semester doing a co-op, and I sat next to my husband in the 3rd row and clapped when everyone else clapped and smiled when he put his arm around my shoulders. I packed his bag when he traveled. I confirmed his dry cleaning. He thought I suspected nothing. I find it interesting looking back how invisible I'd allowed myself to become, and how useful that invisibility turned out to be. He'd stopped seeing me as a person with agency. I was a function. I answered the phone, I organized the mail, I managed the calendar. And so it never occurred to him that the person managing his calendar might note which Thursdays he claimed to be working late. Or that the person who opened his mail might flag the quarterly statement from an account she'd never seen before. Or that the person he'd dismissed as furniture might be quietly and thoroughly documenting everything. May, June, July, I worked my cases. I met with my attorney. I met with the accountant. I waited. The October signing was scheduled for the 15th. 12 days before that, I met with my attorney one final time to review the paperwork. We filed that afternoon. Here's something people don't always realize about divorce proceedings. They don't have to be a surprise. You can file and you can choose how and when the other party is served. My attorney was very precise about timing. 3 days before the signing, the forensic accountant delivered his final report. I sent a copy to my attorney. My attorney, at my direction, sent a copy to the lead investor's legal counsel, along with a letter outlining the discrepancies in the Henderson account and their relevance to the proposed partnership. I want to be careful here, because I'm not interested in exaggerating what I did or making it sound more dramatic than it was. I didn't destroy my husband out of spite. I disclosed financial information that his business partners had a right to know before signing a multi-million-dollar agreement. What they did with it was their decision. What they did with it was, they postponed the signing, notified their own counsel, and froze the co-managed trust account pending review. My husband found out on the evening of October 14th. He called me from his car outside his office, his voice a register I'd never heard before, tightly controlled and on the edge of something. He said, "There are some complications with tomorrow's signing." I said, "Oh, that's frustrating. Do you need anything?" He said he was going to be home late. I said, "Of course, I'll leave something in the oven for you." I hung up and sat in my kitchen and felt something I can only describe as clarity. Not triumph, not yet. Just the very clean, very quiet feeling of being exactly where I had chosen to be, having done exactly what I had decided to do, on a timeline that I had controlled from the beginning. The next morning, October 15th, I was not at home. I was at my attorney's office, where we filed the final documents and where I signed the papers that had been prepared over the previous 6 months. Everything was in order. The business accounts were protected. The assets I'd contributed to were documented. My attorney had been precise. My husband was served that afternoon at his office by a process server 45 minutes before the meeting he'd scheduled with his investors to try to salvage the deal. He called me. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it go to voicemail. The third time he called, I answered. "What did you do?" he said. "I protected myself," I said, "which is something I should have done a long time ago." "You don't understand what this deal is." "I do understand," I said. "I understand completely." He said something I won't repeat here. And then, because I suspect he was grasping for something that would land, he said, "You knew about this for months and you said nothing. You just waited. What kind of person does that?" "The same kind of person," I said, "who organized your receipts and packed your bags and sat next to you at our daughter's concert while knowing exactly what you'd been doing for 2 years. He was quiet. "Goodbye," I said, and I hung up. Now, about the parking garage. His girlfriend, and honestly, I almost feel sorry for her, almost, had apparently been making plans. She'd told people at the firm about the relationship. She'd told her friends the deal was going through and that things were finally going to be official. She had been, based on what I'd hear later from my daughter's friend whose mother worked in leasing, very confident about how October 15th was going to go. She was waiting for him in the parking garage of the Meridian Hotel, dressed up, bottle of champagne. The kind of moment you build in your head when you believe a story is ending the way you wrote it. She was there when he walked out of what had been a very short, very bad meeting with investors who no longer trusted him. She was there when he pulled out his wallet and tried to call a car, and found that the joint card I'd flagged to our bank 2 weeks prior, citing suspicious charges, had been suspended pending review. She was there when he tried the backup card registered to the Henderson LLC account, which was also frozen. I know all of this because my daughter's college roommate's mother, this is Naperville, it's a small world, saw the whole thing from across the garage while waiting for her own car. He didn't scream, exactly. But he was loud, and she was confused. And neither of them had champagne that night. I was at my sister's house in Evanston, eating takeout pad thai and watching a documentary about restoration architects that I'd been meaning to see for 3 years. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Call me." Then another. "We need to talk." Then, about 20 minutes later, "You're going to regret this." I blocked the number. My sister handed me more pad thai and said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a second, really thought about it. "Hungry," I said. "I feel hungry." She laughed. I laughed. And for the first time in what felt like years, the laughter didn't have anything underneath it. No grief, no dread, no performance. It was just funny. It was just real. The divorce took 14 months. It was not easy. I won't pretend it was, because that's not the point of this story, and that's not a kind thing to tell other women who might be sitting where I once sat. There were hard weeks. There were conversations with my daughter that I would do differently if I could. There were moments at 2 in the morning when I lay in bed in the house I'd eventually buy with my own money and wondered if I'd made everything worse. But here's what I want to say, if you're listening and any of this sounds familiar. I had a separate bank account, not because I was planning to leave, not because I'd known all along. I had it because years before any of this, someone gave me the advice that a woman should always have her own financial footing, and I'd taken it without fully understanding why. That account, those records, those 11 years of organized receipts, they didn't save me emotionally. Emotionally, I had to save myself. But they gave me options at a moment when I desperately needed them. I work with a lot of clients on their homes, mostly women, and I find myself saying, in conversations that have nothing to do with design, keep something that is only yours. Not out of suspicion, not out of sin, just keep something, a skill, an account, a record of what you contributed and what you built. You may never need it. I hope you never need it. But if you do, you'll be glad it's there. My business has grown more in the past 2 years than in the 10 before that. I took on a junior partner in January, a young woman just out of design school who reminds me of myself at 24, except she's sharper and more certain and doesn't apologize for taking up space. I finally went back to Spiaggia last spring with my sister and my daughter. We had the tasting menu. We split a bottle of Barolo. My daughter asked me, somewhere around the fourth course, whether I was happy. I thought about it. I'm a person who likes to think before I answer. I'm getting there, I said. Faster than I expected. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. And that, not the card declining, not the papers being served, not the frozen account or the champagne that never got opened. That was the sweetest moment of all. The quiet kind. The kind you don't plan for and can't manufacture. The kind that comes on the other side of doing something very hard in the only way you could live with having done it. I came home that night and stood in the entryway of my house, and thought, check the paperwork indeed.